Hi there. I think at the heart of every church, including the Church of Nowhere, should be the core of forgiveness. Forgiveness is the core. And I think forgiveness is actually the only rational response that one can possibly have in this particular world. Although we will get on to another response by the end of the video. So these are all the practical benefits of forgiveness. Which is why I say it is a rational, constructive response to cultivate. These are the two principles, I suppose, that lie behind forgiveness, which is the core. But I have to say that forgiveness is not denying that you're concerned about somebody's behavior or about some kind situation caused by people's behavior. Understanding arises, understanding people's behavior, but in no way are you condoning. So you're not condoning the particular behavior, you're merely trying to understand it, perhaps in order to combat the thing that you don't condone. As they say, the best way to defeat your enemy is to know your enemy. And that is true as well. And the final thing is that you may have to actually condemn some behaviours or institutions or social groups or whatever for doing something which is, it might be illegal, but even if it isn't, strictly speaking, illegal, then it is certainly immoral. So a moral judgment does come into it at some point. Forgiveness has got nothing to do with these three things: condemning, not condoning, and being concerned. And no doubt you can think of many, many examples of this. But on the other hand, when you go back to the core, which is forgiveness, you can have a look at the two principles. That one is that it's kind of the reassuring thought, I suppose, that everyone is doing the best they can with the tools that they have. Everyone is doing the best they can with the tools that they have. So that also might be knowledge as well. So they're doing the best they can with the knowledge that they have, or with the support that they have. So if they don't have much knowledge and they don't have much support, then things are going to go awry. Okay, and and they might be doing the best they can in the situation, but the situation is so appalling that sometimes even the best that they can do is either totally ineffective or even makes the situation worse. Okay, so you can think a lot of examples of that as well in your life and in the lives of others and in the lives of social institutions as well. And the second principle, I think, which is dovetails with forgiveness, or is part of the reason why one might forgive, is that there's always two sides of every story. So within every conflict, you've got the combatants, and you've got their stories. He did this to me, she did this to him, and in fact, I've extended this even to, if you've got an object, okay, you've actually got 360 degrees of angles that you can view the object from. So if I'm viewing the object from here and you're viewing the object from here, we might be actually seeing what appears to be a completely different object because we're not seeing it from the same angle. We're not coming from the same place. We're not coming from the same assumptions, put it culturally. So you have people with different assumptions trying to sort out a problem between them, and they're not even coming from the same place, the same philosophy, the same ideology, or something like that. And yet they still have to find some kind of common ground even though they're looking at the problem from a different viewpoint, and they might have to reach for common ground between them, which is not easy. And when you have two sides to any story, of course, you have to bear in mind that perhaps the story is true from both sides, which is a peculiar thing to say. But certainly from the person looking at the particular side or has their particular story, their story is valid and true, and has meaning and has importance to them. So we probably know all this, really, in actual fact. But if these things are true, if these things are assumed, as I say, without you're not necessarily condoning either side or either person's story. You might even hold one party in condemnation. And you're certainly concerned by the conflict between the two parties, because it is a matter of concern. And, we've got to worry about the things that do matter, and not worry about the things that don't matter. But we've also got to be able to discern, to choose between the things that do matter and the things that don't matter. So I'm sure you can look at lots of examples of that in both your life and in the life of other people and in the life of social institutions and governments and ideologies and things like that. But there are positive, and of course we also have to include here like the forgiveness of others, obviously, and the self-forgiveness. Now, I'm not going to really go into self-forgiveness because that's kind of a topic all of its little lonesome, really. I'm only talking about the forgiveness of others, but briefly I might talk about the forgiveness of the entire universe, of the entire world, which we'll come to by the end. But anyway, moving on to the positive gains, as it were, of forgiveness of others. Well, for a start, and this letting go of your negative thoughts. I mean, letting go of resentment, or letting go of a sense of unfairness or injustice, or something like that. This actually is more beneficial to you than to other people. So part of forgiveness is actually quite selfish, really. I mean, you're going to let go of negative feelings, which are actually going to do you a lot more harm than being concerned about somebody else or condemning them or certainly not condoning them. So you might be forced into condoning something, perhaps even, which you don't really want to condone, and that creates cognitive dissonance, which creates stress. But at any rate, forgiveness is certainly a way of relieving stress. You literally, you just let it go. I mean, you imagine you're wearing a coat of resentment, and you take that coat off, and you haven't got that wet coat on your back anymore. So you're relieving yourself of stress. So there is a kind of selfish aspect to forgiveness in actual fact. And it might be that you use more energy in resentment than you do in forgiveness. So forgiveness might even have an evolutionary purpose, because it could be that, to hold resentment and to bear a grudge actually loses energy for the actual individual, and whereas the individual that's actually quite good at forgiving has more energy to spend on survival. So it could be that that forgiveness is part of our toolkit for survival, in actual fact, as individuals, and perhaps even as communities. So there is that to it, and then of course, and these are in no particular order really. Towards reconciliation, I mean, there's no doubt about that forgiveness is obviously, the paving stones on the path to reconciliation. And you forgive various things, you forgive various items come up, and the only really way out of it is to forgive. And this is going towards some kind of reconciliation, resolution, and end of conflict. And animals do spend a lot of time, for example, trying to avoid conflict, because conflict can often do you as much, if not more, damage than the person you're being in conflict with. So that's something else to bear in mind. Again, an evolutionary aspect or reason why we have a tendency towards reconciliation rather than continuing a conflict until everybody is exhausted. And certainly then we have this thing about moving on. We can sort of draw a line underneath something that's happened. Through forgiveness, we come to closure, final closure. It's a complex and slow process, and it's not an easy path, of course, to draw closure and to move on. But certainly, if you're never, you're not going to move on. You're never going to be anything other than stuck in the past. And if you're stuck in the past, again, you're going to suffer more than the person that's keeping you in the past, or the past actions that are keeping you in that period of time when these bad things happen to you, or bad things happen to other people, or to your community, or institution, or whatever. So objectively, moving forgiveness is part of moving on. It's kind of like the motive force behind moving on. And then we come to preventing future conflict. There's no doubt about it that forgiveness is part of a toolkit which is designed to try to make sure that future conflicts are minimized, and we don't have a repeat of things which happened in the past. Again, this is extremely hard because unfortunately the past does come back to bite us, and things that happened in the past are not easily given up, are not easily sloughed off. And indeed, so and history has a way of repeating itself, despite our best efforts. But certainly, I think forgiveness is part of what could be a sort of part of a process of preventing future conflict. And then, of course, the final thing, I think, but these are in no particular order, really, is learning from the past objectively. So, and this, I suppose, is bound up with self-forgiveness. If you can look at your mistakes objectively by forgiving yourself first, then, but again, perhaps you can prevent yourself from making future mistakes by this means. So you kind of figure out where you went wrong, and without dwelling on it in a kind of self-blame kind of way. Again, you're moving on within yourself. And then the final thing is forgiveness of the entire world. I mean, if we think of the world as being a sphere of scarcity, I mean, I know everything's recycled, but from some point of view, there's going to be scarcity at the heart of this world. And from scarcity, there arises greed and fear. And from greed and fear arise aggression, war, the blame game, resentment, and all these layers of emotion, which can lead to real conflict and to real self-destructive behaviors. So if we look at the world as being kind of like almost the ultimate cause of things that we don't condone or we condemn or we are concerned about, then it might be that meditation, which is one of the pillars of the Church of Nowhere, comes into play here, because you actually forgive the entire world. You go into a place of relaxation, where you can actually say to yourself, the scarcity is at the heart of fear and greed, and fear and greed is at the heart of everything that I condemn, everything that I don't condone, everything that I am concerned about. And again, you can go into a sort of place of understanding that ultimately everything is scarce, and that's what everybody is fighting over, whether it's scarce resources or scarce emotions, or perceived scarcity anyway, at the very least. I mean, there might be real scarcity, but also there might be perceived scarcity, such as emotional scarcity. You might think that your parents don't love you enough, or didn't love you enough, or whatever, and loved your sister or brother better than you did, and all this kind of stuff. But you might go into meditation, and it's not exactly forgiveness, but it's kind of like you just adopt a sort of chilled out attitude to this world, which is sort of hopelessly flawed. And no matter what we do, there's going to be somebody who's going to be a loser. For every winner in any situation, there's going to be a loser or losers, and they're not going to be very happy about it. But then again, if they practice or cultivate forgiveness, then maybe they can see that, okay, for every winner, there has to be a loser, and this loser is me today. But then tomorrow maybe I'm going to be a winner. If in fact, you can actually divide the world up into winners and losers. I mean, in one sense, we're all losers and we're all winners. So you could adopt, as a result of your meditation, a sort of non-dualistic attitude to winning and losing and having and not having and gaining and lose and success and failure. You might briefly, for a time anyway, go beyond those dualisms and actually just see the world as a place where there is duality in this world, but in your meditation you can go briefly beyond that in your terms of your consciousness. And I think so that could be a form of forgiveness on the level of actually changing your consciousness, which might be pretty good to cultivate as well. But in any case, if you can't meditate, then forgiveness, moving on from a situation or moving on from what somebody is, if they've angered you in some way, moving on from that to a place of constructive behavior rather than destructive resentment, would be the most logical action to take, really. But as I said, if you're concerned about something, then you're still going to act on this world. Perhaps you're going to act in concert with some political community or some political institution to produce change that will relieve you of your concern. Or if there are things that really need condemning, then action might be taken. For example, some kind of consumer action, the boycott of products, or as the United Nations does, an actual embargo on trade with a country that is behaving badly. But always remembering that understanding, for example, terrorism, and understanding the origins of terrorism is not the same as condoning it. You don't condone terrorism. You don't condone political violence in any shape or form. But at the same time, you're also looking at the causes of things rather than just treating the symptoms. So I hope I've shown that, the core of every church, the core of every religion should be forgiveness. And forgiveness actually has a biological function, an evolutionary function as well as being good for your own individual mental health.